At 7:15 in the morning, in the frozen forests of France, one American lieutenant picked up a field telephone. Then he walked out into the snow. In front of him were 600 German infantrymen. Behind them were 6 Tiger tanks, and behind him was an American battalion that was about to be overrun. His name was Garlin Conner. He was only 5'6". He weighed about 120 pounds. He was a tobacco farmer from Kentucky. He had never finished high school, and officially he was not supposed to be leading a charge. He was an intelligence officer, a man who worked with maps, reports, prisoner interrogations, enemy movements, not a man expected to run towards 6 Tiger tanks with nothing but a telephone and a spool of wire. But when the German attack began, the American forward observers were dead or wounded. The artillery could not see the enemy. The battalion could not stop the tanks. And if no one moved forward, hundreds of Americans might die in their foxholes. So Conner made a decision. He grabbed 400 yards of telephone wire, ran across open ground under shell fire, dropped into a shallow ditch ahead of the American line, and became the eyes of the artillery. For the next 3 hours, he called down fire so close to his own body that shrapnel landed inside the ditch. When German tanks and infantry closed in, he told the guns to fire on his own position. Not once, again and again. By the time the attack was over, the German assault had collapsed. The Tigers were destroyed or abandoned, the infantry was shattered, and one quiet Kentucky farmer had saved his battalion. This is the story of Garlin Conner, one of the most decorated American soldiers of World War II, the man who called artillery onto himself, and the hero whose Medal of Honor came 20 years after he died. Garlin Conner did not look like the kind of man who could stop a German counterattack. He was small, quiet, soft-spoken. He came from Clinton County, Kentucky, a rural place of farms, hills, hard work, and long distances. As a boy, he grew up on tobacco land. The nearest school was far from home. Life did not hand him comfort, it handed him chores. Weather, dirt, and responsibility. That kind of life made him tough without making him loud. When Conner enlisted in 1941, he was not famous. He was not a college officer. He was not the image many people had of a battlefield commander. But war does not always choose the largest man. Sometimes it chooses the man who keeps moving when everyone else stops. By January 1945, Conner had already survived more combat than most soldiers could imagine. North Africa, Sicily, Italy, Anzio, southern France, the long push toward Germany. He had been in multiple major campaigns. He had landed under fire. He had been wounded again and again. 7 times. Most men would have accepted evacuation. Most men would have stayed in a hospital as long as they could. Conner did not. He kept returning to his battalion. His body carried wounds. His record carried medals. But the men around him knew something more important than what the paperwork said. When things turned desperate, Conner moved forward. That was his pattern. Not for glory. Not for speeches. Not because he thought he could not die. He moved forward because someone had to. By late January 1945, the war in Europe was still brutal. Germany was losing. But losing did not mean harmless. The fighting in Alsace and eastern France remained vicious. The Colmar Pocket was one of the last German-held areas west of the Rhine. Frozen forests, villages, farm fields, snow, ice, and exhausted men on both sides. The Germans were trying to hold what they could. The Americans and French were trying to crush the pocket and push the enemy back across the Rhine. Conner's battalion, the 3rd Battalion of the 7th Infantry Regiment, had been holding the line in freezing conditions. The cold was constant. Foxholes froze. Weapons jammed. Hands went numb. The sleef came in short pieces. German patrols came at night. Artillery came by day. The men were tired, dirty, hungry, and still expected to hold. Conner had recently returned from the hospital. His wounds were still healing. He should not have been looking for danger. But on January 24th, danger came looking for them. At first, it was artillery. German shells tore into the trees ahead of the American line. The forest exploded. Branches shattered. Frozen dirt jumped into the air. Men pressed themselves into foxholes and waited. A bombardment like that usually meant one thing. An attack was coming. Then the shelling stopped. For a few seconds there was silence. Then came the sound every infantryman feared. Tank engines. A runner came into the command post. The Germans were advancing, not a patrol. Not a small probe, a serious counterattack. Hundreds of infantry, 6 Tiger tanks. The Tiger was one of the most feared tanks of the war. Heavy armor, a powerful 88mm gun. A machine that could turn foxholes into graves. The American battalion did not have tanks in the right place to stop them. There were no tank destroyers ready to meet the attack. The terrain made movement difficult. The German armor was coming through the woods toward the American line. If those Tigers reached the foxholes, the battalion could break. The only weapon with enough force to stop the attack was artillery. But artillery had a problem. It needed eyes. Someone had to see the German advance. Someone had to call corrections. Someone had to tell the guns where to land. The forward observation post had been hit. The observers were dead or wounded. From the command post, the view was blocked. Trees, smoke. Terrain, the artillery could fire blindly. But blind fire would not stop 6 Tigers and 600 infantrymen. Conner studied the situation. He understood what had to happen. Someone needed to go forward, far forward, ahead of the American line, close enough to see the Germans, close enough to adjust artillery, close enough to die. He picked up a field telephone, took a spool of wire, and walked out. Conner did not give a dramatic speech. He did not ask for volunteers. He did not wait for someone to order him. He simply left the command post and ran into the snow. Behind him, the telephone wire unspooled. In his hands was the only connection between him and the artillery battery miles behind the line. The ground between the command post and the forward position was open. Snow covered everything. The Germans could see movement. Their artillery observers were watching. Conner ran anyway. At first, the German guns were quiet. Then they opened up. Shells landed to his left, then to his right. The Germans were adjusting. They had spotted him. A lone American officer running across open ground, with wire trailing behind him. A shell hit a tree ahead of him. The tree exploded. Wood and ice and metal filled the air. Conner kept running. Another shell landed behind him. The blast threw pressure into his body. He stumbled, but he did not stop. The wire kept unspooling. Every step mattered, because if the wire broke, the artillery would be blind. If Conner died, the battalion might die with him. He reached the American front line. Men in foxholes looked up and stared. An intelligence officer was running past them, toward the Germans, not away from them. Conner did not stop to explain. He kept going. 30 yards beyond the foxholes, he found a shallow ditch. It was barely cover. Not deep enough to stop a shell, not strong enough to stop machine gun fire. But it gave him a view. That was all he needed. He dropped into the ditch, chucked the wire, cranked the phone, and made contact with the artillery. Now he was the eyes of the guns. Conner raised his head just enough to see. The Germans were advancing through the trees. Infantry first, moving in organized groups, rifles ready. Experienced soldiers, not a mob, not a reckless charge, a disciplined attack. Behind them came the Tigers, massive. Slow, methodical, cliffing through smaller trees like they were nothing. Conner could see 4 tanks at first, then all 6. They were using the forest for cover. But they were moving toward the American line. Conner gave the coordinates. The first American artillery shells came in. They landed too far behind the German infantry. Conner corrected immediately. Drop 100, fire again. The next salvo landed in the German formation. The forest erupted. Trees shattered. Snow and dirt lifted. Shrapnel ripped through the infantry. The German advance stopped for a moment. Then Conner called again. Repeat fire. Another salvo, then another. The American 105mm howitzers began firing hard. Shell after shell slammed into the woods. The German infantry scattered. Their formations broke. Men dove for cover. Some crawled, some ran, some did not move again. The artillery was working, but the Tigers kept coming, and that was the real problem. Artillery could tear infantry apart, but a Tiger tank was different. Its armor was thick, its gun was deadly. Even shells landing nearby might not stop it. A Tiger could be damaged, tracked, blinded, immobilized. But it had to be hit close, very close. Conner shifted the fire. Now he was calling shells onto the tanks. The Tigers moved in a wedge. Their guns began firing. One 88mm shell hit an American position. The foxhole disappeared. Another Tiger fired. More dirt and snow blasted upward. Conner knew what was happening. The tanks were closing. If they reached the foxholes, they would crush the battalion's line. The artillery began landing around them. Some shells hit too far. Some landed in front. The tanks drove through the blasts. Conner corrected. Drop 50, fire for effect. The next salvo landed among the Tigers. One shell hit a track. A tank slewed sideways and stopped. Its gun still worked. Another shell damaged the engine deck of a second Tiger. Smoke rose, but several tanks kept advancing. Then they noticed Conner. The tank commanders had seen the fire, adjusting too accurately. They saw where the corrections were coming from. They saw the telephone wire. They understood. Somewhere ahead of the American line, one man was directing the guns. And now they were coming for him. The Tigers shifted toward Conner's ditch. He checked his cover. 18 inches of frozen earth. That was all. It would not stop an 88mm shell. It would not stop machine gun fire. It would not stop a tank. The German armor was close enough, now that he could see the turrets, see markings, see movement, see tank commanders, scanning through the smoke. Conner lifted the handset. Then he gave the order that most men would never give. Fire on my position. The officer on the other end asked him to confirm. Conner confirmed, then confirmed again. The guns fired. The first shells landed in front of the ditch. The blast wave hit Conner like a wall. Air slammed into his body. Dirt and ice ripped across the ground. He stayed down. The phone stayed pressed to his ear. He adjusted again, drop 20, repeat fire. The next shells landed even closer, so close that shrapnel screamed just feet above him. So close that if he raised his head, he could be cut apart. So close that the heat of the explosions reached him through the frozen air. But the Tigers stopped. Even Tiger crews did not want to advance blindly through artillery bursting at point-blank range. The tank commanders shut their hatches. The armor paused. For a moment, Conner had slowed the attack. But the German infantry was not finished. Survivors began forming behind the tanks. They used the Tigers as cover. The tanks were moving fortresses. The infantry stayed close. When the tanks advanced, they advanced. When the artillery fell, they scattered, then regrouped. Conner kept adjusting, left, right, forward, back. Every time infantry tried to move, he dropped shells on them. Every time a Tiger rolled forward, he called fire in front of it. He was not simply calling artillery. He was conducting the entire battle from a shallow ditch. And the enemy knew it. German artillery started coming down on him. Now 2 armies were firing around the same spot. American shells in front of him. German shells trying to kill him. Conner did not leave. Time slowed. The cold bit into his hands. His feet went numb. The field phone became slick with ice. Frozen dirt fell into his mouth and eyes. Every explosion slammed pressure into his chest. But he kept calling corrections. One Tiger took a hit that damaged its turret. Another lost its track. A crew abandoned a tank and tried to run. American riflemen cut some of them down from the foxholes. The German armor attack was weakening, but not finished. 3 Tigers still worked. Then 2, then 1. The infantry crawled closer. Some German soldiers were now within shouting distance. Conner could hear voices. Rifle bolts. Movement in the snow. They were trying to reach him. If they cut the telephone wire, the artillery would stop. If they killed Conner, the attack might recover. He dropped the fire even closer. Shells landed between him and the Germans. The explosions created a wall of fire and metal. Fragments struck the edge of the ditch. A piece of shrapnel buried itself in the frozen earth inches from his hand. The Germans went flat. Conner adjusted again. He kept the shells falling. The last Tiger pushed through smoke and fire toward the American foxholes. Its machine guns opened up. American positions were being shredded. Conner shifted every available gun onto that tank. The artillery battery fired a full concentration. 12 shells landed around the Tiger. The tank vanished in smoke and explosions. When the smoke cleared, the armor had held. But the tank was not moving. Its vision ports were smashed. Its movement was gone. The crew abandoned it. The Tiger assault had failed. But the infantry still remained. Conner had been in the ditch for hours. The artillery battery was running low on ammunition. The battalion commander ordered him to withdraw. The guns could cover him. He could make it back. He had done enough. But from Conner's position, he could still see the Germans. He could see them trying to regroup, see them moving through trees, see officers trying to rally men for one more push. If he left, the artillery would be blind again. If the guns fired blind, the Germans might mass for another attack. So Conner stayed. A wounded private had crawled forward to help him with wire and a backup phone. That private was hit by shrapnel. Conner pulled him deeper into the ditch. The private refused to leave. He kept watching for German movement. Both men stayed there, frozen and exposed, while the battle continued around them. German artillery walked closer, 10 yards, 15, 20. They were trying to erase the ditch. Conner called counter-battery fire on the German guns. American artillery shifted targets. The German shelling weakened, then stopped. Conner shifted back to the German infantry. He walked fire across the tree line, across shell craters. Across every place the Germans tried to gather. One German squad made a final attempt. They came out of cover and rushed toward the ditch. Conner called the correction. The shells landed before they reached him. The squad disappeared in the explosions. After that, no more German soldiers tried to advance. The attack was breaking. The surviving Germans began pulling back. Conner kept fire on them as they retreated, not out of cruelty, out of necessity. He had to make sure they did not regroup, had to make sure they kept moving away, had to make sure the battalion survived the day. 3 hours after Conner left the command post, the battlefield went quiet. No tank engines, no machine guns, no rifle fire, only wind, broken trees, smoke, and wounded men calling from the forest. Conner stayed in the ditch a little longer, watching, waiting, making sure the Germans were really gone. Then he finally stood. His legs barely worked. His body was stiff from lying in frozen earth. He helped the wounded private back toward the American line. Soldiers came out of their foxholes and stared. They looked at Conner, then at the ditch, then at the shattered ground between him and the German positions. It looked like the surface of the moon. Craters overlapped craters. Dyed tanks sat in the snow. The German attack had been crushed. The battalion commander met Conner at the line. For a moment, he said nothing. There may have been nothing to say. Because everyone could see what had happened. One officer had run forward with a telephone and held back a counterattack that should have overwhelmed them. Conner was wounded again. A small piece of shrapnel had gone into his shoulder. A medic treated it. Conner was told he was lucky. But luck was not the full story. The battalion had been lucky that Conner was there. After the battle, reports were written. Bodies were counted. Dized equipment was examined. German casualties were heavy. The Tiger tanks had been destroyed or abandoned. The infantry attack had collapsed. The American battalion remained in position. The Germans did not try the same attack again. Conner was recommended for the Medal of Honor. Instead, he received the Distinguished Service Cross. It was one of the highest awards for valor in the United States military. And Conner had already received more decorations than most soldiers ever would. But the men who saw him in that ditch believed something else. They believed what he did went beyond even that. Conner went home in 1945, after years of war, after wounds, after campaigns, after more danger than any man should be asked to survive. His hometown honored him. He met Pauline Wells. They married. And, like many veterans of his generation, he tried to leave the war behind him. He became a farmer again, worked the land, helped his community, helped other veterans. He held leadership roles in farm organizations. He supported men who needed help with claims and benefits, but he almost never talked about the war. His medals stayed hidden away. Not framed, not displayed, not used for attention. The Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Stars, Purple Hearts, other awards, all kept out of sight. When people asked what happened, Conner did not tell long stories. He said he had done what needed to be done. That was all. Decades passed. Then, in the 1990s, a veteran researcher visited the Conner home. He was looking for information about a relative who had served with Conner. Conner spoke about the man. And the memories broke through. After more than 50 years, the pain was still there. During that visit, Conner's wife brought out the old records and medals. The researcher read the citations. He saw what Conner had done. He saw the buried history. And he said what others had believed for decades. This man should have received the Medal of Honor. That began a long fight. Paperwork, appeals, eyewitness statements, military reviews, rejected applications, more evidence, more waiting. Conner died in 1998. He never saw the medal upgraded. He never asked for it. He never built his life around being recognized. But Pauline did not stop. She continued the fight. Veterans supported the case. Historians supported it. Lawmakers supported it. Retired generals supported it. Still, the process dragged on. Years became decades. Finally, the case was reopened. The time limit was waived. And in 2018, Garlin Conner was awarded the Medal of Honor. 20 years after his death, Pauline accepted it on his behalf. She was nearly 90 years old. The citation told the story. He had volunteered to run through enemy fire. He had directed artillery from an exposed position for hours. He had called fire onto his own position. He had stopped a major German counterattack. He had saved his battalion. The medal came late, but the truth finally caught up. Garlin Conner's story is not just about artillery. It is about responsibility. He was not ordered to run forward. He chose to. He was not protected by armor. He had no tank, no bunker, no shield, just a telephone, wire, a shallow ditch, and the willingness to stay where every instinct told him to run. He understood that if the battalion was overrun, men behind him would die, so he became the eyes of the artillery. When the Germans came closer, he did not pull back. He brought the fire closer. When they came closer still, he brought it onto himself. That is difficult to imagine. To lie in frozen ground while shells land so close that the earth jumps around you. To know that one wrong coordinate could kill you. To know that if you leave, your battalion might be destroyed. And still keep talking into the phone. Still keep adjusting. Still keep saving men. Conner was one of the most decorated American soldiers of the war. But he lived like a farmer who had simply returned home, no boasting, no legend making. No need to be called a hero. That may be the most powerful part of the story. He did something almost impossible, then put the medals away. Most people have never heard the name Garlin Conner. They know Audie Murphy. They know famous generals. They know the big battles. But they may not know the Kentucky farmer who stopped 6 Tiger tanks with telephone wire and artillery. They should, because history is not only made by the men who command armies. Sometimes it is made by one wounded lieutenant lying in a ditch in the snow, one man watching 600 enemy soldiers advance, one man hearing Tiger tanks grind toward his line, one man telling the artillery to fire on his own position because retreat would mean other men dying. Conner did not fight for fame. He did not chase the medal. He did not even tell his wife the full story for years. But the men in those foxholes knew. They saw him. They watched the shells fall around him. They knew that if Conner had not stayed in that ditch, many of them might never have gone home. That is why this story deserves to be remembered. If Garlin Conner's story moved you, hit the like button. Subscribe for more forgotten World War II stories, because some heroes do not shout, some do not brag, some do not even display their medals, some simply pick up a telephone, walk into the snow, and call down thunder to save the men behind them.